Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Terry Glavin. I'm counsel for Department of Procurement Services at the City of Chicago. I want to welcome you to today's workshop on behalf of Mayor Rahm Emanuel, also on behalf of Commissioner Jamie Rhee, the Chief Procurement Officer for the City of Chicago. We appreciate the time you're taking out of your schedules to be here today to learn about doing business with the City of Chicago. As usual, I'll try to do my best to make the next hour very productive for you, try to provide as much information as I can. Towards that end, though, I want to be a resource to you even after today's session. So I want to give you my contact information, and if you would like, take it down. Feel free to reach out to me in the future if you have any need for assistance. And if I'm not the best resource at the city, if you reach out to me, I'll do my best to find the best person to answer your questions. So if you want to contact me, you can reach me either by email or phone. My email is my name, so it's Terrence, T-E-R-R-E-N-C-E .G-L-A-V-I-N @cityofchicago.org. And the number at my office where you can reach me is 312-744-0851. Keep in mind, as mentioned, this workshop is being videotaped. It is streaming live on YouTube. So if there's anything that you feel like you missed today or that you want to go back and review again, I encourage you to go to the YouTube video. Also, we have many other workshops. I teach some of those other workshops. Other procurement professionals at the department teach areas in their specialty. And those workshops are available on a list outside the bid and bond room. You can also find them online at cityofchicago.org/procurement. That is our department's webpage. So with that upfront preliminary information out of the way, why don't we start talking about doing business with the City of Chicago. So to get a good idea of what it's like to do business with the City of Chicago, I think it's a good idea to talk about a few topics. Some of those topics are the mission statement of the Department of Procurement Services, briefly the laws that govern the procurement process, talk about types of procurement, certification matters, contract monitoring and compliance, programs and bid incentives, how to navigate the Department of Procurement Services webpage, and then at the very end we'll take some questions and I'll provide some answers. Please save questions till the end. We will try to cover as much material in the meantime. And then I will also stick around after this session in case you have any questions that you'd like to ask offline. Now, the Department of Procurement Services. We are the contracting authority for the City of Chicago. I want to emphasize for the City of Chicago because there are governmental units, we call them sister agencies, that are separate from the City of Chicago, and they have their own procurement contracting authority. Sister agencies include the Chicago Transit Authority, Metropolitan Pier and Exposition Authority, Park District, and there's a much longer list, and that list is available at cityofchicago.org. And if you go up to one of the tabs at the top of the menu, you can pull down a government tab, and it'll be a drop-down menu, and to the far left of that menu, there is a link to a list of sister agencies. Now, why do I bother at our workshop talking about sister agencies? There's two reasons. One is, if you're contacting us about a project, make sure that it's a City of Chicago project so that you know you're dealing with the correct agency when you're getting answers. As a practical tip, I also mentioned it during this session because as vendors, you're looking for business opportunities. You're here to learn about doing business with the city, but keep in mind, there might be opportunities for you at the sister agencies as well. So I encourage you to look at their websites, learn about their contracting process, because it may be a little different, and then learn about the opportunities that are available there. It may be helpful to you in the future. But, as I said, we are the contracting authority for the City of Chicago. It is our job to put contracts into place so that the departments of the city can buy goods and services from vendors. Those goods and services are needed to complete each of their own missions. So we put the contracts in place, and we do so in accordance with law. And I think it's helpful to you to get familiar with the law, because not only do we live by the law of the state, local law, and sometimes even federal law if there's federal funds being spent. We have to live by the law, but as vendors you also have to live by the law as well. It is also helpful to you to learn about the laws, at least generally, because as you'll learn, the procurement process is a competitive process as far as contract awards. So just like any competition, it's in your best interest to learn the rules, because knowing the rules of any competition can make you a better competitor, and it'll make you individually more competitive in the procurement process, but it's also beneficial to us because the better competition we have, as you learn by the process, the better pricing we get, the better skills we get, the better goods we get. So the competition is good for everybody involved. Competition is also good because it allows everyone to have equal access to contracting opportunities, and that's one of the spirit. That is the spirit behind a lot of procurement laws, to have equal and open access to everybody, so that everyone is competing on an even playing field. If you want to learn about the law of procurement, you can learn about the Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act, and you can just do a internet search engine search, just putting that right in, you'll find it. It'll come up quickly, and you can look at the state law that governs our procurement process. You can also go to a website called amlegal.com, amlegal.com. That is an authorized publisher of the Chicago Municipal Code online. You can go to section 2-92, and you'll see in that section of the code the enabling ordinance. That is the ordinance that creates our department, empowers our chief procurement officer, and lays out a more detailed set of rules about how our process is supposed to work. Even further, if you want to go to cityofchicago.org/procurement, you can also find our department's policies and procedures, and those might be helpful to you. How we are running a procurement process, why we do it the way we do it. And then you might see things like protest rules, dispute rules. What are the procedures for filing a bid protest if you felt like you should have won a contract? Or if you're having a dispute about payments, maybe you need to file a dispute with the city. There are procedures for how to do that properly. So what are the types of procurement that you'll be involved in when you're working with the City of Chicago? Well, the type of procurement that we categorize a purchase into depends on whether we're buying goods or services. If we're buying goods, we put it into categories of small orders if the purchase is under $100,000. We put purchases into regular purchases of over $100,000. If we're buying services that are of a professional nature, we might do an RFP, or request for proposal. If we are looking for a pool of vendors of professional service providers, we may do an RFQ. If we're buying construction services for medium, small projects perhaps, we might do what's called job order contracting, or JOC. So there's a number of ways that we look at categories of procurement, and a lot of times it depends on the type of purchasing that we're going to be involved in. So, what about small orders? Small orders are procurements, as I said, under $100,000. Quotes may be solicited by telephone, fax, or written quotation, or on the Department of Procurement Services webpage. Again, a reminder that if you're looking for small order opportunities, you should be looking at our department's website. When we have a small order solicitation, City of Chicago certified MBE, WBE vendors are solicited first, and MBE, WBE compliance is required for bids over $100,000. Now, many of you may know what MBE, WBE means, many of you may not. So very quickly, I will describe them. MBE is a minority business enterprise that's certified with the City of Chicago. A WBE is a women-owned business enterprise that's certified by the City of Chicago. There's also other designations. There's DBE, that's Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. There are designations for BEPD, that's business enterprises owned by people with disability. There's even ACDBE, the Airport Concession Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, for vendors that do work related to the airport. Now, there are separate workshops that get into the details of who's eligible, how to get certified. Once you get your certification, what do you do with that certification to gain its benefits? So I encourage you to look at the workshop schedule to learn about certification. But once there is certification, the question is, how does a certified firm get involved? A certified firm can get involved as a prime contractor, bidding directly on a contract, can also be a subcontractor, and it is often a requirement that an MBE or WBE firm be used as a subcontractor. So there's many ways certified firms get involved, and in small orders, they can get involved in the process as well. Now, over $100,000, well, what's the difference? How do we treat them differently? Well, they're larger amounts, so some of the requirements for us getting the word about the contract out and getting the contract in place differ a little bit. First of all, we advertise in the Sun-Times. If you go to the classified ad section, you'll see grids of advertisements, little columns from different governmental agencies, and it'll give you just a taste of what the project's about. If you see an advertisement in the Sun-Times, you come down to the city, bid and bond room, and you sign up and take out a bid package where more detail is provided, and you can make a decision about whether or not you want to compete for a contract. We also list large bid contracts advertised on the City of Chicago website. You can come in here and see takeout lists of current bid opportunities in the bid and bond room. And for larger orders, to keep in mind, the bid solicitation period is 10 to 30 days. And keep in mind also, a bid deposit may be required for certain solicitations. Also, keep in mind that when you pick up a solicitation, look at the specs and see whether or not there's going to be a pre-bid conference involved in the process. There might be a chance to come in after you've reviewed the specs with other vendors and ask questions about the specifications, which we may answer in the form of a written clarification if there's no need to change the specifications, or if we find out that the specifications are confusing or somehow flawed, we might do an addendum, which is notice that the specifications are going to change a little bit. So I encourage you to come to the pre-bid conferences because you learn about all these things by participating. Also, practical tip, they're not a bad opportunity to network with other vendors. Even though you're competing on the current project, perhaps with them, it is still a good opportunity to network within your industry on the project, and it may lead to opportunities after the project or elsewhere. At the pre-bid, we will review specifications, address concerns regarding the specs. We have a question and answer session, and as I mentioned, may result in an addendum or clarification. Similar to a pre-bid conference, there might be a pre-bid inspection. Some projects, like construction projects or some type of maintenance repair, might require that we bring the vendors out to the site to actually see what they're going to work on so that they can make an educated bid for doing the project work. Hard sometimes to price out your work when you haven't actually seen what it is you're going to be working on. So a pre-bid inspection might be a possibility. Okay. There's no definite answer to that question. The question was, how often does a pre-bid or pre-inspection occur? And it doesn't always happen, so to put a number on it would be difficult, but look at the specifications. The specifications will talk about whether there's an optional or sometimes even mandatory pre-bid or inspection. Now that's important to note because if it's mandatory, it means you have to be there to bid. If you fail to attend the pre-bid if it's mandatory or pre-inspection if it's mandatory, it could be a basis for your bid being rejected because then we don't necessarily know that your bid is reliable, that you have all the information you needed to make a proper bid. So if it's mandatory, attend. If it's not mandatory, if it's option, I still encourage you to attend, but you don't really have to. If no pre-bid conference or pre-bid inspection is offered, then there's a contact on the specifications in the solicitation package. You can reach out pre-bid on your own and ask questions and potentially get answers, depending on what it is you're trying to find out. Yes, I'm going to take one more question. Wait till the end? Great. I appreciate it. Okay. Now, the bid documents. You pick up a solicitation, you see the details, you realize that it's something you're interested in. So what do? You come up with a price if it's a competitive bid, and you submit your bid. When you submit your bid package, you want to make sure you have crossed your T's and dotted your I's. And why is that? Remember I talked about the Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act? It's a law that we have to live by. Well, that law does a number of things, but one of the main things it does for procurement is it establishes that competitive bids have to be awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. And those are three requirements, of many, but those are three primary requirements that need to be fulfilled. So what does it mean to be responsive? It means that you are giving us the documents and you're agreeing to give us what we want to buy the way we want to buy it, okay? So, for example, if we want to order a box of white paper, and we specify in the requirements and the specifications that you've picked up that we want to get white paper from you, and you can get the best pricing on a different colored paper, but you're unable to get that kind of pricing on white paper, but you can get the other color very cheap, and you come in and you submit a bid, and your bid is the lowest bid, but it's not what we asked for, then you are not being responsive, and your bid will be rejected as being not responsive. There's another way of being not responsive. Say there are documents that are required to be submitted with your bid, like say there's MBE, WBE participation requirements, and there's a form for that you're supposed to submit with your bid that lists what MBE firm you want to use and what WBE firm you want to use. And say you failed to submit that schedule, that form with your bid, even if you have the lowest bid, if we required you to submit that schedule, you are not responsive because you didn't give us the documents the way you were supposed to. And this goes right down to if we ask you to initial something, if we ask you to sign something in a document, your failure to do that could be a basis for rejection. So cross your T's, dot your I's, give us the documents that are asked for, and commit to delivering what we want the way we want it, as we specified in the requirements. And then you're going to have more likelihood of success. Now, the last quality of a bid, as I mentioned, was responsibility. You have to be responsive and responsible. Responsible, just a quick note, is you are presently capable of delivering what we want the way we want it. So you've submitted your documents, and let's just say there's a specification that requires auto repair service for city vehicles. And say the specifications say, due to the large volume of city vehicles, you must have 10 bays for 10 different vehicles to be operated on once, and you must have 10 mechanics that are trained in this type of auto mechanic work. And when you submit your bid, you are the lowest price, but let's say, for example, you're a startup, brand new company, and you've got one bay to work on cars and you've got 2 mechanics. Well, the problem is, even though you've got great mechanics and even though you have great integrity and you can give the lowest price, you're not responsible. It's not an attack on your business. It's just that you're not presently capable of delivering to the city what they want, the way they want it, and have the capacity to do so. So you want to be the lowest responsive and responsible bidder when you're bidding on competitive projects. Okay. Now, when you submit your bid, include any deposits that are required. You want to include any bid fees that might be required. Typically, mind you, bid fees are not required. Bid fees are usually for very large construction projects or other very large projects where there's a certain amount of time and money spent by the city evaluating very elaborate bids and proposals. So typically, there's not a bid fee, but there is typically a bid deposit. And a bid deposit is really just an assurance that you're going to honor your bid if we evaluate all the bids and want to award a contract to you. And it is a bid bond is something you get back. as long as you fulfill your commitments. Now, when you submit a bid bond, I'll just say as a side note, keep in mind that you are committed. You have to do what we call hold firm. You are committed for 60 days if it's a city-funded project, and if there are any federal dollars in the project, you have to hold firm for 90 days. What does that mean? That means if you are looking at a project, for example, with the City of Chicago, and you're looking at a project with the City of Rockford at the same time, you can't submit for both, and then let's say Rockford comes in first and wants to award you a contract. You can take the contract with Rockford, but for 60 days, you have to still be able to honor your bid with the City of Chicago for 60 days. If you try to withdraw before that 60-day period, we may keep your bond. That's the penal sum or the penalty, perhaps, of not honoring your bid. Now, you can ask for exceptions. We can ask for extensions beyond 60 days, so there's some flexibility there. But as far as the commitment, it is for 60 days, and your bid deposit assures us that you're going to honor that. Bid openings are Monday through Friday, except for major holidays. Bids are typically due at 11 a.m. here in the bid and bond room. Bids are literally opened and read aloud. Bids are tabulated and typically available within 24 hours online. So you can actually see who bid and how your bid compares to other bidders online, typically within 24 hours. Now, keep in mind, once you've bid, the contract's not awarded the very next day. We have to evaluate bids. We have to evaluate them for responsiveness, responsibility. We have to look at who the lowest price bidders are. And at the end of the day, we will award a bid to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. Now, there is a process to it. It has to go through typically review at the city. There has to be recommendations of award. There have to be checks on insurance, performance and payment bonds if they're required. So there's a number of things, and there's a reason why contract award doesn't occur right away. But we do move that process efficiently, and we do want to award contracts as soon as possible. Okay, so that is a summary of the award process, and it gives you an idea of why it doesn't get awarded immediately, but it does happen as efficiently as we can get it accomplished. Now, I talked about competitive bids. Competitive bids are awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, and typically that's for goods and for work services. Work services are services that are considered by law to be less than professional services as far as the level of skill or level of I don't want to say level of quality, but the level of skill, perhaps technical skill that's required to deliver. So examples of work services are like landscaping, security guards might be considered work services. So these are services that are extremely valuable to the city, but by law they're not considered professional services, and they go by way of competitive bid. Now, if you rise to the level of a professional service like healthcare providers, could be certain types of IT, information technology services can be professional services. So if you fall into the professional services category, we follow what's called a request for proposal process. Now, if we're putting out an RFP, the process starts out the same. We get a department that wants to buy something, in this case professional services, not a good. They put together the specifics of what it is that they want to buy. They send it over to us, and there's a little more detail to it, but we advertise the project. But instead of submitting a bid in response to our solicitation to vendors, you're going to submit a proposal. And a proposal is a persuasive document telling us why you're the best vendor at the best value. And a proposal, depending on the complexity of the project, might be very, I don't want to say short, but it could be much briefer if it is for a small project. If it is a large enterprise-sized project, then it could be binders and binders. But the depth of your proposal is going to depend on the project. When you respond to a RFP, you're going to submit a proposal, and the city will evaluate it, and typically evaluate it through an evaluation committee made up of representatives from the city. The evaluation committee will score you and your proposal, or your business and your proposal. You might be asked to come in and answer questions, provide an oral presentation. You might be asked written questions. So there's a process that the evaluation committee goes through to find out how good you're going to do at performing this project compared to other vendors. Now, price does play a role. It's not as though price doesn't matter to the city of Chicago. We do want to be cost effective in our procurements. But price is not the only factor as it is with competitive bids, or I should say the bottom line factor as it is with competitive bids. So it's a balancing act. It's quality services balanced with a reasonable price, and that is hopefully the result of an RFP process. Then we have requests for qualifications. Well, requests for qualifications, or RFQs, are similar to RFPs because we're looking for professional services, but instead of wanting to award one contract to a vendor or just a few contracts to vendors, we're looking to create a pool of vendors for future series of specific projects. And what we're looking to do is we're looking to qualify people into a pool, or businesses into a pool, within a general scope of work. For example, let's say we are looking for engineers that can work hand in hand with construction companies on road construction for the Chicago Department of Transportation. So we're looking for professional service providers in the area of engineering, right? So we put out a solicitation asking for engineers to submit their qualifications, and we in our solicitation will specify it that this is for perhaps construction road work, and here are the kind of high-level details of what the work's going to involve. And if you're qualified, submit your qualifications. If you see this type of solicitation in your industry and you're interested in, you submit your qualifications. It's like a corporate resume, sending in a corporate resume for a job. Yeah. But again, it could be binders and binders. It could be talk about all your staff, their expertise, that the fact that they've worked on similar projects for large municipalities, and what those projects looked like, what was the success rate. So there could be binders and binders of qualifications, or it could be much shorter. At the end of the day, you're going to submit to prove up to the city that you're qualified to be in the pool. When you're in the pool, do you get work right away? No. You might. There might be a project that's awarded right away, but it might not be right away. But when a project comes around, you will be in the pool, and it's typically for a certain number of years. And we will go to the pool when we have a project that's specific, and we will see who wants to do the project, and we will negotiate pricing, and we will award the project to the vendor or vendors to do the work that are in the pool. When they do that project, it'll be under a task order. A task order is like a mini contract within the broader pool contract, or the broader. When you're in a pool, you get what's called a master consulting agreement with the city. It's basically another word for, or another description for a contract with the city that keeps you in the pool. And then when you do a project for specific work, you get a task order, which is a project-specific contract. You complete the work in accordance with that task order, and when you do, you go back in the pool and wait for your next opportunity. The pool stays open for the life of the master consulting agreement, which would be several years, could be several years. Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about job order contracting, which is the next process, but I wanted to just touch on it a little bit, because if you're interested in it, you'd want to look on the workshop schedule and see when the job order contracting, or JOC workshop, is going to take place. So job order contracting, or JOC, is a construction related process. It's for small to medium-sized construction projects, and it is, again, competitive in nature. And a very brief summary of it is, it basically allows vendors that want to compete on projects to bid based on discounts off of a pricing book. And there's a pricing book that has been developed, and that pricing book breaks down typical tasks in a construction project into individual tasks, and then there are prices associated with those tasks, and you bid basically the tasks, or discount off tasks. Now, if you're not in construction, you're not going to be interested in. If you're in construction, you may or may not be interested. But I'm going to leave the details of JOC to our JOC workshop, and you can learn in greater detail about how to participate through that process. And there's a little brief description of the JOC process. If you're interested, again, I encourage you to go to the JOC workshop. Now, I had to talk about certification earlier because it really, the earlier part of the presentation wouldn't have made sense without some context. But this is basically a summary of several of the certifications that are available. Now, keep in mind these certifications, MBE, WBE, BEPD, ACDBE, DBE, these are all certifications that you can utilize if you're eligible. If you're having questions about whether or not you're eligible, contact our certification unit. We have a certification unit in our department, and that certification unit also teaches several workshops about certification. They are listed on the workshop schedule. A couple points I want to make. If you believe you're eligible, even if you don't have a specific project in mind, I encourage you to get started on the application process because it does take a little bit of time. We do review and look into the firms that are applying to make sure that they are eligible so that individuals or groups that are not eligible don't wrongfully take advantage of the certification programs. Also, keep in mind that if you see an opportunity now but you haven't gotten certified yet, or you see an opportunity now and you haven't even filed your application yet, keep in mind you don't have to be certified to bid on projects, even if you're eligible for the certification. Remember, the certification provides certain benefits. The certification, if you're eligible, creates a more level playing field for historically disadvantaged individuals and businesses. But it's not necessary to get that certification to bid on a project if you're eligible. In fact, many firms and individuals are eligible and decide for a variety of reasons that they don't want to pursue the certification, and that's fine too. But if you are eligible, I encourage you to at least look into it, see if it's something that would benefit you to be certified. And also keep in mind that the certification that's offered by the City of Chicago is not just useful for city contracting. Many other governmental units, many private businesses, private corporations even, want to increase their supplier diversity. And in order to do that, many of them rely on the City of Chicago certification because we do have an extensive evaluation process that is thorough. So when vendors are vetted to make sure they're eligible, private business entities and other governmental units can rely on the certification for purposes of increasing their diversity as well. So getting an MBE or WBE or other certification with the City of Chicago can be beneficial in your marketing as well, even outside of city contracting. So I encourage you to look into it if you're eligible. So just a couple basics. The eligible individual or individuals have to be at least 51% owner of the firms. They have to exercise actual ownership and control. I mean, it has to be really an MBE or WBE firm. It's not something where someone can be sort of a hands-off operator. I don't even want to say operator, a hands-off owner. Someone else really runs the business. That's not really what the MBE, WBE program is about. It has to really be about ownership and operation by the person or people that are the basis for the eligibility. And it's a similar requirement under the BEPD program, business enterprise owned by people with disability. Now, when you're doing business with the City of Chicago, keep in mind we do fulfill contract monitoring and compliance requirements, and we expect vendors to exercise good faith, due diligence, to work within the contract monitoring and compliance requirements that we have. Compliance includes equal employment opportunity, MBEW, BE, BEPD, participation requirements. When vendors have participation requirements, for example, payments to those vendors have to be reported to the City of Chicago electronically. And we do monitor to make sure that when there is participation by certified firms that they're actually getting paid. And we will monitor that payment process. There are a number of areas that we monitor, and we encourage you to do your best to be familiar with what we monitor, be familiar that we do expect compliance, and that way we can make sure together that the procurement process of the City of Chicago has integrity and that everybody's participating in good faith. And that's a little bit of information that I mentioned about MBEW, BE, DBE compliance. And when I talk about reporting requirements, monthly subcontractor payments are recorded, certification forms are used, weekly certified payrolls come in from vendors, and we even have information about lien waivers. And then this is a summary. Now, I'm not going to get into the detail today about each and every one of these certifications and programs. I've talked about them briefly in the context of other areas of procurement today, because you should be familiar with these concepts as you're doing business at the City of Chicago. I teach a separate workshop about programs and bid incentives. There's a recorded version online, so if you go to YouTube, you can see it if you're interested. But if you want to come in person, check the workshop schedule, come on in, and I teach that workshop as well. I get into much greater detail about each and every one of these topics, from programs to incentives. And if you believe you might be eligible, it's worth coming in, because you may get a competitive advantage, or at least participate on an even playing field again, if you're eligible for any of these programs. Example, if you qualify for a bid incentive, and I, during a previous workshop, described this. Gentleman here, I think, probably recalls, but a bid incentive, for example, is something where if you qualify for a bid incentive, you fall into a category where we have a bid incentive. You might qualify for a reduction in your bid for purposes of consideration during the bid process only. And what do I mean by all that? Let's say, for example, there's a category, a bid incentive, and, for a certain group or type of business entity. And let's say the bid incentive has a 5% bid incentive. What does that mean? It basically means that if you qualify for the incentive in that case, that let's say you bid $100,000 on a competitively bid project, and let's say your neighbor bid $100,000 as well. Well, on their face, each bid looks the same, right? $100,000, $100,000, looks like it's going to be a tie. But if one of the vendors qualified for a bid incentive where there was a 5% incentive, then for evaluation purposes only, that vendor is viewed as having bid $95,000 instead of $100,000. So that vendor wins. When it comes time to perform the contract, though, the contract will be awarded for the $100,000. So you're not sustaining any losses by taking advantage of the bid incentive. So I mentioned that because in procurement, you'd be surprised how many contracts come down to less than, for example, 5% difference in bids. So that could be your competitive edge that gets you a contract if you qualify for a bid incentive. So if you want to come to the workshop, here is a list of some of the incentives. If you feel like you may fall in any of those, you can come on in person at the workshop and learn a little bit more about the detail and see if you're eligible. I've talked a lot about what you can find at the Department of Procurement Services website at the cityofchicago.org/procurement. You can learn about awarded contracts and modifications. You can see what payments have been made to vendors that have current or past contracts with the city. You can look at bid tabulations, as I mentioned. You can look at weekly bid opportunities. If you are going to bid on a contract and you need to find MBEs or WBEs in certain areas of expertise, you can look at our directory for MBEs and WBEs. You can learn about bid incentives, see what the regulations are that we live by. So there's just a whole lot you can do at cityofchicago.org/procurement. I encourage you to go there, wander around if you have time within your business schedule. But I encourage you to go wander around. You can learn a lot. And if questions come up, you can always reach out to us in the future to get some clarification. And what I did is I included a few screenshots so you can get an idea. For example, say you want to learn a little bit about what contracts might be of interest to you. You can go to the icon in the center of our page. It's towards the top. There's an icon that says awarded contracts. You click on that. It'll by default send you over to City of Chicago's what we call Contract Finder. And that database allows you to do many things. And one of those things is to look for existing or old contracts, look for payments to vendors. And that's very helpful intelligence to have as a vendor. What can you do with it? Well, you can see if the city buys things that you sell. You can see if a contract is in existence for what you sell. If that contract's going to end anytime soon, it'll give you an idea, because the city tends to buy similar things over and over. So if you look and you see a contract's about to expire in, let's say, 6 months, then you can feel pretty good that there might be a solicitation coming out in the near future to get a contract in place for when that contract ends. So that's when you'll probably want to start monitoring our department's website, picking up bid opportunities, checking the paper, and keep an eye out for when for when the next opportunity is going to make itself available. And this is the face of the search page. You can search by vendor name, project numbers, project descriptions, and there's many ways to search. It's also a very useful way to network. You can look around, and for example, if you see a contractor in your industry that's currently on a project, well, maybe that contractor, either on the existing contract or a future contract, is going to need your participation as a subcontractor. Might give you a basis for reaching out to that vendor and seeing what opportunities might be available. You can look up disclosures. You can see what vendors have provided in the form of economic disclosure statements and other information. We are about transparency, so there's a lot of information that we push out there, publicly through our website, and by going to this website you can see what information we are making available. Now, as I flip through, when you're doing business with the City of Chicago, the business process more or less starts with us, and it ends to a certain degree with us once we get that contract awarded to you. When you get a contract awarded by the City of Chicago, you're actually going to do business with the departments that asked for the contract to be put in place. So your business relationship is going to be with that department. So let's say that the Department of Aviation wanted to get a vendor for a certain good or service, and they reached out to us, had us advertise for an opportunity to do business with them, and we went through the process which I have so far described, and we award the contract to the vendor. We have created a business relationship between you and with the City of Chicago, but your customer, your client, is in that case Department of Aviation. When you're doing the work of the contract, you're going to receive your orders not from procurement, but from, in that example, the Department of Aviation. When you deliver, you're going to deliver in accordance with the contract to the location specified by the department or in the contract. And when you deliver, you're going to invoice the department. You don't send your invoice to the Department of Procurement Services. You send it to the department you're servicing. And when that department receives your invoice, they're going to review it, and they're going to check it to make sure that the invoice, the dollar amount is the right amount, and then they're also going to confirm that the work was done or that the good was delivered and that is the right quality, that it meets the requirements of the contract. And when they've confirmed all that, then the department will forward the invoice to the comptroller. The city's comptroller, Department of Finance, is a separate department, and they will review the invoice that's been approved by the department. And ultimately, if everything squares away, then the comptroller sends you, the vendor, the check. As far as payment processing time, that period will be specified in your contract. So look to your contract to see what the payment period is between the time you deliver and the time you're actually going to receive payment. When you are doing business, just like any business relationship, there might be disagreements. Typically, you'll work it out just like you would with any customer with the department. But if it comes to the point where there is a disagreement, where there just is not a meeting of the minds, and it can't be resolved, then as I mentioned earlier, you go to the procurement webpage, look at the policies and procedures for disputes, and it tells you exactly how to file a dispute, timelines, the procedure. If you feel you have a bid protest or a dispute or some other legal issue, I do encourage you to speak with a private attorney about it, but our policies and procedures are available online for your review, for reference. When you have this business relationship, it lasts for the life of the contract, the term of the contract, which is specified in the contract documents. When that contract comes to an end, then we put out another solicitation and another contract will be put into place. So that sort of gives you the life cycle of the procurement process and what it's like to do business with the city. I encourage you to look for solicitations for contracting opportunities. I encourage you to network with one another. I encourage you to become familiar with the policies, rules, and procedures of the City of Chicago Department of Procurement Services. And if you do all that, it is an opportunity to do business and to serve the city and help us serve the public. So I appreciate your interest in learning about the process and your participation in the workshop. You have my contact information. Please reach out to me in the future if you have any questions. What I'll do to wrap things up is if there are any questions, I will take questions. I will repeat your question if you don't mind, just for the purposes of the video, and then I'll answer questions. If there's any question that you feel is very project specific or you'd rather not ask until we are offline, I'll be happy to stick around and answer any questions for you. So yes, the first question. The question is, how often does the city put out RFQs or RFPs for services? And similar to my answer to the gentleman up front, it's very difficult to give you a definite number because it really is based on needs. What I can say is that the Department of Procurement Services has collected intended purchasing from all the departments and aggregated, digested that information, and put it into a buying plan, which I believe there's a copy available outside the bid and bond room. If there's not, I'll get you a copy. It's also available at cityofchicago.org/procurement. And that buying plan is a prospective plan for the upcoming year. It is very helpful information. By department talks about what departments intend to buy, may buy, and it gives you a great deal of information. Now keep in mind, it is not a commitment to buy. It is a buying plan. It is subject to change, but it will give you some information about what the departments intend to buy, including professional services, which would fall into RFPs and RFQs, and then when potentially, what quarter of the year those purchases might be made. No, bid opportunity list is the current opportunities that are available, and then the buying plan is a prospective booklet that describes what it is the city intends to buy in the future. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Sure. My email is terrence.glavin@cityofchicago.org. In case you missed my number, the number at the office I can be reached is 312-744-0851. Yes, and keep in mind, this is being taped, so anyone that happens to miss anything from the session can go back to the YouTube video and review any information. But my email is terrence.glavin@cityofchicago.org. Yes, sir. When an opportunity comes out, the question is, when an opportunity comes out, is there a list of prime vendors? There is a takeout list that we have of vendors that have taken the solicitation. So those are potential vendors that are going to bid on the project. Now keep in mind, you can take out a solicitation and not bid, so it's not a for sure window looking into who's going to bid, but that gives you an idea. And again, by going to the project in its previous form, in the old contract, that's a good way. Because remember I said there are bid tabs that are published for each project? Well, those bid tabs stay online. So the same project was probably previously under a contract, and then that previous contract was bid on, and then that project would have had bid tabulations, and many vendors repeat on a project. So if you want to know who's bidding on these type of projects, the likely bidders are going to be the ones that bid in the past, and they would be on the bid tabulation from the last time that project went around. Any other questions? Yes? Yes. That's a very good question. Is there a way to get direct notices electronically? And the answer is it's called Dps Alerts, and you can sign up for Dps Alerts at our department's webpage. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
The RFP, do you have to include your 5-year plan, or is it organization, or is it something else?
The question is, in response to an RFP, do you have to include your 5-year plan? And the answer is, it's going to be project specific. You need to look at the specification very closely and see if it's being asked of you. So it may be required, and if it's required, then you're going to want to include it for sure. If it may be required, a lot of times specs will say you may submit this or not submit that, and then that's your discretion. So if you think it's helpful to your proposal, it makes your proposal more persuasive. Even if it says may, you might want to submit things like 5-year plan or other information. If it says must submit, then you better make sure you submit, because you might be rejected for being not responsive. If it doesn't ask for it, I'm going to leave that to your judgment. Sometimes, though, a spec will say do not submit something. If that's the case, do not submit it, because it could be creating non-responsiveness or establishing non-responsiveness, and you might get rejected for that. So remember, read the specs, read the solicitation, and try and do things the way we're asking, because the failure to do so could very well mean a loss of your bid. And it's really a shame if, based on a technicality, your bid gets rejected. But our system has to have integrity, and sometimes on technicalities you have to enforce them, because otherwise the system has no integrity. So don't spend all your time preparing a proposal or preparing pricing on a bid, and then fail to win the award because of a technicality. Because that's a shame for you. You wasted your time. You wasted the business opportunity. It's a shame for us, because maybe you were the lowest bidder, and now we have to go to the second lowest bidder, so we're spending more than we otherwise would have had to because of a defect in your submittal. So keep that in mind. And with that, I'm going to wrap things up. I'll stick around for a little bit in case there's many extra questions. Hope this was a time well spent. I look forward to seeing you at future workshops. Have a great day.